So we're joined again today by geopolitical analyst extraordinaire Laith Marouf from Beirut. And Laith, as I've explained in the past, is the executive director of Free Palestine TV, doing not only extraordinarily informative work, but very, very courageous work on the front lines of this genocidal rampage throughout the region of West Asia by Israel. Thank you very much for joining us today, Laith.
Great to be with you, Brother Dimitri.
So, Laith, I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball by starting my conversation with you today with this question. In your opinion, who killed Charlie Kirk?
Wow. Hey, Dimitri, we didn't agree to this, man. What the hell? But, you know, just to be frank here, obviously, I never get any questions from you or anybody. When people send me questions, I say, don't, please, because I'm going to sound robotic. But you are putting me on the spot here. And I think looking at the history of manufactured events that the Zionists have conducted over the last 30 years, starting with something like September 11 and the Arab Autumn, I would say clearly the Zionists are interested, and their top priority right now inside Western societies is to maximize the fascism and minimize the possibility of integration of Arabic and Muslim peoples in diaspora in these countries, and make sure that they have no political say in what's happening in the country. And that's why we see the Zionists over the last 3 decades sponsoring every fascist movement in the West and pushing them into political dominance, as has happened, let's say, is happening right now in the UK, and what had happened already in the United States with the ascension of Trump. This is the main benefactor of killing Charlie Kirk, and the fascism that we're seeing right now being unrolled in the United States is the Zionists. So I don't have to have any proof, given that we have a historical record of operations with this specific aim always being managed and conducted by the Zionists in the West. So yeah, if somebody would ask me, as you did, I would say the Zionists are behind it.
Now, I want to be clear, because I don't want to get in trouble with YouTube, that it's not the position of this program that there is hard, definitive evidence of Israel's involvement in the murder of Charlie Kirk. And it's not just for purposes of, placating the YouTube censors. I actually believe that we don't have hard, definitive evidence. But I have to agree with you, Laith, that there, as investigators of criminal affairs often say, cui bono. And it's no doubt that Israel and Zionists are seeking to profit from his death by, making our government even more fascist than it already is, and inclined to engage in even more brutal suppression of criticism of Israel than it already is. And there also, as others have documented, and I've talked about previously on this program, Kirk seemed to have becoming a critic of Israel to some degree before he died. And he was coming, as others have documented, under significant pressure from his Zionist donors, and even was getting overtures from Netanyahu, the war criminal himself, and offers of money. So plenty of reason to suspect Israel. One thing I want to say about this, Laith, and I suspect you're going to agree with me, is that, two things. First of all, it may be that we will never have definitive evidence of who was involved in the murder of Charlie Kirk. And of course, it may have been more than one person, may have been many persons, for all we know. But I doubt we're ever going to have definitive evidence. And there's going to be, just as in all high-profile political assassinations in the United States, it seems, time and again, we're left in a state of uncertainty because of the incompleteness of the record and the contradictions in the record. And if we find ourselves in that world where the question has not been definitively put to bed in most people's minds, It seems to me that for the very first time, Israel is on the receiving end of a principle which it has applied ruthlessly in its relations with the West. The principle is it's not what the reality is that matters, it's what people's perceptions of the reality are. And if Israel finds itself in a situation in the weeks and months ahead where even if it had no involvement in Charlie Kirk's murder, a majority of Republicans suspect that it did, hard to see how that isn't going to have profoundly negative consequences for the genocidal entity. Here it is the perception that is going to matter more than the reality. And from what I can see on social media, Laith, there are a lot of people on the right and the left and in the center, independents, Republicans, Democrats, who are questioning very seriously whether Israel had a hand in his murder. Any thoughts you want to add to that before we move on?
Yeah, a few things. One, obviously, this is another indication of the rapid collapse of imperialist order. Okay. Remember, scientists have studied the history of every state in the world, took over a decade to see how states and empires collapse beyond the basic understanding of Ibn Khaldun on the rise and fall of dynasties and states and empires. And they figured that you can be a state that is total dictatorship and lasts forever, or you can be a state that is total democracy and lasts forever. But the minute that you start as a state moving on this indicator under pressure from your population, whether you're a dictatorship that is trying to, under pressure of the population, you start to open up, and or you're a total democracy under pressure of the population, you start to tighten up rights, that is the beginning of the collapse of the state. Okay, so this is what we are seeing right now with the overreach of the FCC, the Broadcasting Commission in the United States, which has threatened ABC about the comedic speech of Jimmy Kimmel, which led to his basically removal from air openly. And the threats that are coming, what we saw for NBC and so on, this is the attempt to curtail a supposed right that is the top in the Constitution of the United States, the freedom of speech, right? So this is an indicator that the state is unable anymore to manage the opinions of the populace, okay? That's one thing. The other thing that we can see here is that the Zionists have lost control of narrative, period, on a global scale, and for the first time on a Western scale, okay? There is no coming back from this. The Zionist control of the mind of the Western audience required 80 years of programming, okay, since the beginning of this colonial project. And it required the othering of Arabs and Muslims, which has been decreasing, this othering of Arabs and Muslims, because of the mass migration to the West, because of integration and intermarriage and what have you, and arts and culture that have now humanized, no matter how much of a condensed propaganda that was compiled over 80 years now is gone with the broadcasted genocide for the last two years. So the act of killing Charlie Kirk is actually another indicator of how weak the Zionists have become, that they had to go to the extreme of manufacturing a assassination on live television in order to inflame some emotions in a specific sector of the population of the United States, and they failed to get the majority of this sector, the right wing, the white nationalists, whatever you want to call them, who are right now fighting each other over this. So it's actually not strengthening their point, it's weakening the most important sector of society in the United States for the support of Israel, this ultra-right, ultra-nationalist, constituency. So all of these are actually should be taken as indicators of the end nearing for both Zionism and American imperialism.
You know, you caused me, as you were talking, Laith, all excellent points, but you caused me to think of another that you made when we started having these discussions during the genocide. This was well over a year ago that we began having these discussions on Reason to Resist. And very early on in our discussions, long before Donald Trump returned to the White House, before he won the election, and even before we knew for certain that he was going to be the Republican nominee, you said on this program that the day was coming when Western authorities were going to round up Muslims and Arabs and put them in detention camps, just as they had done to the Japanese. Now, when you first said that to me, I remember feeling startled. It had never occurred to me that that might happen in my lifetime. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized it was certainly a possibility, a realistic possibility. You know, now today, Laith, I mean, we're not there yet entirely, although one could argue that that process has already begun with, you know, Muslims and Arabs being gathered up and put in these ICE detention camps. I don't know if we know how many are there, but they are certainly amongst those being targeted. But whatever may be happening in those ICE detention camps, we are a lot closer to that reality now than we were when you first made that prediction. I take it you still stand by that prediction, that you see that coming, or do you think it more likely that support for the Zionist genocidal entity will collapse before the Zionists and fascists in the West are able to implement such a plan?
You know, probably any sane or logical person looking at this genocide unrolling 2 years ago would have thought that at some point before now, the Western elite would have abandoned the Zionist colony for the sake of their own states and stability, and for the sake of the relationship with their own populace. But what we've seen is that the Western elite are willing to have even a civil war in their own countries just to maintain their support of the Zionist colony. So this is a question that the citizens of those states have to find a solution to, and that requires usually mass mobilization and an attempt to remove those who are, harming the state and its populace. Now, look at what's happening over the last few months with all those ICE raids. I remember when September 11 happened, I had a cousin from my mother's side who was a sheriff in San Francisco. Okay? And for a few decades before that, the FBI and Homeland Security and all of those kept on harassing him to, transfer to there because they needed Arab speakers, and he was refusing. But when September 11 happened, the order came to transfer him to Homeland Security. So he had no choice. As an Arab, he wasn't gonna say no then and become a suspect himself. So what I heard from him over the decades about what happened then at that moment is that there was tens of thousands of Arabic and Muslim Americans and migrants in the United States that were rounded up. And his job was to sort them out, go and talk to them, figure their history, all of those things. And he said the best thing that he could do to somebody is deport them. Because if he didn't deport them, he didn't know where they end. And those tens of thousands of Arab and Muslim Americans and migrants, their own states didn't care about them. Much of them were there without their families. Nobody followed up on them. So we don't, till today, we don't know what happened to these tens of thousands of Arab and Muslim Americans. And I would say, although the mass media is concentrating in the United States on the Latino detainees by the ICE and the raids on businesses and farms and so forth, there's a really large hidden capture operations that are happening in the United States that we don't know about, that are concentrated on Arabs and Muslims, okay? And their own states don't care about them, so we will not hear what's happening to them. And the Western media doesn't care about them, and it's not part of the Democrat versus Republican war that the Democrats want the Latino vote, and this is why their media is even highlighting those situations. That's clear to me that we're already past that point. And only the most visible files, like of, let's say, graduate student or whatever it is that have been captured by ICE that are making it to the media. But below all of this, there's a huge number of Arab and Muslim Americans that are being disappeared.
So since we're on the subject of Arab Americans, it seems like a good point for us to talk about the deadly drone strike in South Lebanon, which is, well, we know that it killed 3 children and their father, and a 5th person, the mother, was wounded and survived, although I doubt she'll ever recover in any meaningful sense from the horror of what befell her family. And the Lebanese government said that the children and the father are U.S. citizens. Now, the genocidal Trump regime has issued a statement about this. I mean, the last time I checked, it did acknowledge that one of them had apparently filed a petition with U.S. immigration authorities for permanent resident status at some point. But it said, while acknowledging that the situation is fluid, it was at least preliminarily of the view that they were not, in fact, U.S. citizens. But first of all, can you tell us about the circumstances of this murder of this family? Putting aside the question of whether or not they were Americans, what happened down there? And is the Lebanese government sticking by its position, despite the State Department's denial that these are U.S. citizens?
Yeah, there was no retraction of this statement, and the family of Sharara, the larger family of the father, are saying that they are American citizens. The funeral is going to be happening a few hours from now in Bint Shbil. I think people need to understand how many of the villages in the south of Lebanon are actually populated by a majority of diaspora Lebanese. For instance, Bint Jbeil itself, at least half of the city are, diaspora that are from the Detroit, Durban area in Michigan, and they come back every summer to, enjoy the great weather and their land and reconnect their children generations after. Now we're talking about people that have been migrating since the 1940s and before to the United States. There's whole villages in the south that are in, 70% of them are in Australia, and they come back every summer. So this is not an unusual situation. What happened is the Israelis fired 2 missiles in Bint Jbeil that are fragmenting, armor-piercing missiles. And one of these missiles went through the car where the father, the mother, and the children were driving in Bint Jbeil. And the fragmenting missile, chopped off the heads of all of the children. Okay. The images are horrible. Obviously, we're all been almost desensitized with these 24 months almost of genocide, and specifically targeting children that the Zionists are conducting. But this was a not that often that you see in Lebanon the distribution of such images. And the effect was on the population is angering the population, and to the point where for the first time the new prime minister and the president had issued a condemnation of targeting civilians since the ceasefire. This is how docile they've been, but now the pressure mounted very heavily that they decided to issue a statements of condemnation. The schools were closed yesterday in much of the country as a mourning for the loss of these children. And we expect tens of thousands of people today in a few hours to join the funeral.
Which will be taking place in the south or in Beirut?
No, in Bint Jbeil, actually. It will be in the village where they were murdered. And one more thing I wanted to say was that obviously this is happening all across the south of Lebanon almost on a daily basis. There was a second missile that hit a scooter in Bint Jbeil also. A young man was martyred. And all of this indicates to us, given that the Israelis haven't really been able to kill any senior Hezbollah officer or member or target actual military targets over the last few months, this means that now the Israelis are unable to, through their intelligence, to find real Hezbollah military or human targets, and they have decided that they're going to conduct a terrorism campaign. This includes starting to send out maps again of southern villages over the last few days, over the last week, with houses that are marked for destruction by GBUs. And there was these attacks are on villages that the Israelis occupied for months and destroyed all the houses and went into every alley and street. So there's really no military targets, and the only reason that they're doing this is to terrorize the Lebanese people that are returning to their villages in the south.
Right. Which seems almost like a precursor to some kind of some further attempt to conduct a land invasion into the south and try to secure permanent control over South Lebanon. In any case, as I recall, Laith, before we finish talking about this particular atrocity, Bint Jbeil is known as the capital of the resistance because of its history of resisting the occupier. And also, although it is not far from the border of Israel, my recollection is certainly not on the border of Israel. It's, if I could recall correctly, somewhere in the range of 15, 20 kilometers away from the border of Israel. How close is it to the border of the genocidal entity?
Yeah, maybe 6 kilometers maximum. There's one more village, 2 more villages that are surrounding it, just between it and the border. So it is pretty close to the border. It's almost considered a first line because the other 2 villages make like a triangle with it. So there's an area that is, although it's 6 kilometers to the border, it's in eyesight of Israeli positions.
Okay. So next I want to talk to you about some, I guess we could charitably describe them as diplomatic developments in the last few days. And that is that the governments of Canada, France, Australia, and Portugal have recognized the state of Palestine. Now, I absolutely want your thoughts on this. I just want to note for the record that Palestinian solidarity organizations that I respect, that do good work, they've been working very hard to defend the rights of the Palestinian people for many years here in Canada, are cautiously endorsing this, and with some reservations, significant reservations, they're praising the government, for example, of Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, for doing this. I've been quite blunt about my own views. I'm very curious to know how you view this particular diplomatic development.
Well, before I give you my opinion about these diplomatic developments, I'll give you my opinion about those pro-Palestine organizations that claim to be doing lobbying. Such a move clearly shows that they don't understand what lobbying is, even how to manage your power in the face of government. If we look at how the Zionists work, the minute the government retreats on a position that they want to push the government, they push even further. Unfortunately, these amateur lobby organizations, the minute they see some retreat from the government on a position, they start praising them, leaving the space that was just open to them instead of pushing more. Okay. So yeah, they have much of these lobby groups that claim to be lobbying for Palestine have been unable to effect one file on Palestine in 20 whatever years that they have been existing. The only thing that has been successful in pushing governments in the West on the file of Palestine is direct confrontation in the streets, in the workplace, in the airwaves, with the collaboration with genocide. So,
sorry to interrupt. Can I just stop you right there? If you were tasked with writing the statement of one of these Palestine lobby groups responding to the announcement about the Canadian government, for example, recognizing Palestine, what in essence would your statement say?
In essence, my statement would say that, number one, this announcement should have been coupled with the withdrawal of acknowledgement of the State of Israel and a demand to end apartheid and occupation and colonization in the West Bank and Gaza, and to, at the same time, stop all the supplies of weapons to the Zionist colony and trade with it until it complies with international law and end its complicity in genocide, in occupation, and in apartheid, which is a war crime according to international law. So you see, you don't back down, you double down actually, and you say, hey, here's the government retreating because it can feel the pressure from the populace. Let me push further.
Right. Sorry. So did you want to add anything before we move on to your observations about the recognition of Palestine by these 4 states?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. Just for the record, for those of you who don't know what my opinion is, I actually think this is likely to do more harm than good because precisely for the reasons that Laith has identified, it is not coupled with any measures that are actually going to save Palestinian life, that are going to force Israel to demonstrate a minimum of human decency. All that's really going to come out of this is that some people, including in the Palestinian Solidarity Movement, are going to be deceived into thinking that their government is taking meaningful action and will therefore end up applying less pressure than they otherwise would on the government to do more. And they might stop applying pressure altogether. So I don't see this as anything but a bad thing, and I'm absolutely and 100% disgusted by it. So there you have it. That's my opinion. I had to get it off my chest. So now, similarly, now this is not, one might argue, of a purely performative nature, but the European Commission presented a proposal on September 16th to the European Council to suspend certain trade-related provisions of the association agreement between the EU and Israel. And I'd just like to show you and our audience, Laith, the statement. So it's a little hard to read, but I'll get to the pertinent parts of it now. Following the announcement of President von der Leyen in her State of the Union address, the European Commission presented today its proposal to the Council, that would be the Council of Europe, to suspend certain trade-related provisions of the association agreement between the EU and Israel as well as its proposals for sanctions on Hamas, extremist ministers, and violent settlers. The Commission is also putting on hold its bilateral support to Israel, with the exception of support to civil society and Yad Vashem. Concretely, this affects future yearly allocations between 2025 and 2027, as well as ongoing institutional cooperation projects with Israel and projects funded under the Regional EU-Israel Cooperation Facility. The proposals follow a review of Israel's compliance with Article 2 of the agreement, which found that action taken by the Israeli government represent a breach of essential elements relating to respect for human rights and democratic principles. This entitles the EU to suspend the agreement unilaterally. What is your take on this measure? Would you qualify this as a meaningful action on the part of the European Union?
I think this is another delay tactic. Maybe I didn't say it clearly about the recognition of the Palestinian state. First off, it's a recognition of a Vichy regime under the control of the collaborationist Mahmoud Abbas, who has been directly involved in the genocide with his killing of tens of Palestinians in the West Bank on behalf of the Zionist colony over the last 23 months, and the collaboration of the Palestinian Authority forces with these occupation in the destruction of almost all the refugee camps in the West Bank, and the depopulation of tens of villages in both the Dead Sea Valley and around the Hebron and Jerusalem areas. This is what Carney and Starmer and Portugal and whatever are acknowledging as the Palestinian state. Collaborationist regime. They're also acknowledging it only if it's disarmed and only if it has no control of its airspace, while it's facing a genocidal regime that they don't want to say anything about or stop collaborating with. Here is the same situation. This does not cut trade with the Zionist colony. It cuts trade with the West Bank colonies. It doesn't cut trade with Israel. It removes some of the tax exemptions that Israel has in the European market. It does not sanction the prime minister, who is the one making the decisions. It supposedly will sanction some extremists, which we've seen already happen and then withdrawn over the last 2 years multiple times by the US, by the West. And so all of this is performative. It doesn't, for instance, that declaration of accepting Palestine as a state, it's a fictional state. It doesn't exist. It's under occupation. And they're asking it to be disarmed while you've just acknowledged a state. And that state is under occupation. And in international law, a state has the right to defend itself against occupation. So at the same time, you're condemning Hamas, the only one defending the new state of Palestine from occupation. So all of this is just theatrics. And this is, why it's actually angering when you see people that claim to be lobbying for Palestine to praise all of these theatrical moves. Look at what needs to be done. And, me and you as Canadians, we've worked with the labor unions in Canada for decades. I organized the 2003 demonstrations, 2002 and 2003 demonstrations against the occupation of Iraq. And, we brought 350,000 people to the streets of Montreal through working with all the unions who went on strike for that day to go and demonstrate. Today, it's been now 2 years, not one union in Canada who has passed the BDS a decade ago already, like the CSN in Quebec or CUPE in National in CUPE, Ontario. Now, one of them called for a general strike. Now, one of them actually even called their members out in these demonstrations that we saw over the last 2 years. Now, one of them called for work stoppages in factories that are supplying the Zionist colony with weapons. On this, they all should be following the lead of the labor unions in Italy, who went on a general strike yesterday. All schools or trains or buses, all ports, all airports, everything was closed down. Where is the labor unions in Canada? Where are the labor unions in the UK? Where are they? What are they doing? They are participating in genocide. So that is what we need as citizens. Let's not care about what these governments are telling us. What's important is what can the citizens bring into fact. Otherwise, Canadians, if they don't move in such ways as the labor unions in Italy did, are setting themselves up to to themselves be victims very soon after the end of this genocide in Gaza.
Yeah. I'm very glad, Laith, that you raised this. I omitted to mention when I asked you about the recognition of Palestine that these governments are coupling this gift, which they purport to be conferring upon the Palestinian people, this empty gesture, with a demand that Hamas disarm, and that it give up rule of Gaza, and that the rule of, at least the nominal rule, they don't call it nominal rule, but we know it would be purely nominal, of the occupied Palestinian territories be turned over entirely to the Palestinian Authority, led by Mahmoud Abbas. Now, I just want to show our audience the results of a poll that was done in occupied Palestine in May of this year by a reputable Palestinian polling agency on the question of disarmament. And people were asked, do you support or oppose the disarmament of Hamas in the Gaza Strip in order to stop the war on Gaza? The total across both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip was 77% opposed. Only 18% were in favor. Interestingly, in the West Bank, the proportion who were opposed was substantially higher, was 85%, whereas 64% were opposed in the Gaza Strip. And then they also asked in this poll, do you support or oppose the expulsion of some Hamas military leaders from the Gaza Strip if this is a condition for stopping the war on Gaza? So again, the question is, if you're told by the Israelis that we won't stop pummeling you unless you expel Hamas military leaders from Gaza, what would you say? 65% said that they would still oppose, even if that were a condition of stopping the war, they would still oppose the expulsion of some Hamas military leaders from the Gaza Strip. That was across both the West Bank and Gaza. And again, the number in the West Bank was higher than in the Gaza Strip, 74% opposed versus 51% in the Gaza Strip. So, Laith, I'm curious as to your thoughts as to the following. We hear all the time from the Zionist propagandists that all Hamas has to do is lay down its weapons and turn over the hostages and relinquish control of Gaza, and the genocide will come to an end. It seems to me pretty damn clear from these numbers that the Palestinians living under occupation ain't buying that argument. Why is that, Laith? Why aren't they buying that argument?
Yeah, let's keep that survey right in front of us to actually understand that. And it's actually very helpful to see this difference between the opinions in the Gaza Strip and the opinions in the West Bank. So that first question about disarmament, we see the people in Gaza who are under genocide and are seeing their families die every day. There is a bigger number of people that are support disarmament than that's in the West Bank, who are seeing their families and their homes destroyed every day while not having arms to fight back. So you see those who are suffering the results of colonialism and occupation in the West Bank in a state of disarmament are against ever disarming. Those who are suffering genocide under the condition of because they are carrying arms, there's more of them that are willing to give up arms. You see, so it's it clearly shows us that even if you wish to be disarmed, in the end you're going to be genocided, just like the West Bank is. Okay, Similarly, with the issue of the leadership of Hamas leaving. You see, the people in the West Bank are under total control of the PA, of Mahmoud Abbas, and they're seeing their homes destroyed, and the Palestinian Authority security forces collaborating with the Zionists, and still, after capturing or killing Hamas, members in the West Bank, they're still being suffering. So they're saying, no, don't have the Hamas leadership be forced out. So this is very, very telling statistics, and I'm really happy that you brought them on the show here.
Yeah, and so before I want to show you one other result from this poll, which is quite telling. But before I do that, I want to point out that we are being told by these charlatans, people like Mark Carney, and I'm doing a report on this today separately, that they care deeply about democracy in Palestine, and they want to see democratic reforms. But at the same time, they are demanding the disarmament of the resistance, even though the vast majority of the Palestinians don't want the resistance to disarm. They are demanding that Hamas relinquish control over Gaza after it won the last elections in occupied Palestine, the results of which were simply flushed down the toilet by Israel in the West. They're demanding that, even though, as you can see here, the majority of people living in both Gaza and the West Bank don't want that. They don't want Hamas to be removed from power. They certainly don't want them even to be expelled from the Gaza Strip. And so these people, it's amazing that they're claiming with a straight face to actually care about the democratic will of the Palestinian people when they're demanding things that are profoundly contrary to the democratic will of the Palestinian people. It's just the audacity. I mean, and to be clear about this from my perspective, Laith, I just think my obligation as a citizen somebody who lives outside of Palestine, who isn't a citizen of Palestine, and who's just trying to help them avoid to defend themselves against the crimes of Israel and its Western backers. My view is that I should support the democratic will of the Palestinian people. If you actually see them as human beings, who the hell are we to dictate whether or what I think about Hamas is irrelevant? And what Mark Carney thinks about Hamas is irrelevant. What matters is what the Palestinian people think. At least that's what you would say if you actually cared about the democratic will of the Palestinian people. If you've had something to add about that, Laith, I invite you to do that. If not, I want to show you one other part of this poll.
Yeah, let's see the other part of the poll.
Okay, so in this poll, and by the way, these questions have been asked repeatedly. So the numbers I'm showing you here are pretty consistent with the results of many prior polls over the last 2 or 3 years by the same polling agency. So they also asked people, what would you do if there was an election today? Now, before I tell you the results, the question here focuses on 2 candidates. Okay, the candidates are Mahmoud Abbas of Fatah, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, and Khalid Mishal of Hamas. Okay. Now, before I tell you the results of this, they also asked another question, which included a third candidate, Marwan Barghouti. Okay, and that poll showed that if those 3 were the candidates, the turnout would be somewhere around 64%, and Barghouti would get about 51% of the vote, and Mishal would get, I think, something around 32%, and Mahmoud Abbas would get 11%. Okay, but I don't want to talk about that with you, because Marwan Barghouti is languishing in an Israeli dungeon. He's been there for over 20 years. There's no indications to get free, and we don't even know if the man is physically and mentally capable anymore of holding political office because of the torment, the torture that they have inflicted upon him, for 2 decades. So I'm just going to focus on, the candidates who might be available for the election. And what they said here, the turnout would be 47%, so it would drop from 64%. But Mishal would get 68% of the vote, and Abbas would get 25%. And 7 months ago, only 24% of among the the actual voters chose Abbas, and 74% chose the Hamas candidate. So there's been a significant drop, but it's still more than 2/3 of those who would vote say they would vote for Mishal, the Hamas candidate. My question to you, Laith, is, and if you have any other observations about this, please feel free to share them with us. But why do you think so few Palestinians would vote for Abbas? And why, nonetheless, despite these numbers, are the Western governments and even the Arab autocracies doing everything possible to consolidate the power of Abbas over occupied Palestinians?
Okay, so there's a few things that about this poll. One of them, one problematic thing, is that they put Khalid Mishal as the candidate for Hamas. Khalid Mishal is the most collaborative member of Hamas, with specifically the Turks and the Qataris. He's been kind of pushed out of all the, the base of Hamas doesn't like him. The rest of the Palestinians don't like him. So it's very telling that they chose him. And when it says, what was it, 7 months ago, only 24% voted for Abbas and 74% voted for Hamas's candidate, they probably had a different name than Abbas, than Khalid Mashal there. And that shows you actually that, the number will rise higher if the candidate was somebody like Sinwar, who is now martyred, or Haniya, who's also now martyred, or one of the people that the Zionists almost assassinated last week in Qatar. If we put that, one of the names from that group, the number would be much higher for who votes for the Hamas candidate. The other thing is that clearly those who are voting in this situation for Mahmoud Abbas is because they're holding their nose, and they don't really want Hamas only because, let's say, they are secular in their political outlook instead of religious, okay? And they don't really want to vote for him. And if they had a better option, which was Barghouti, they would vote him and not vote for Abbas. So the only reason people in this poll in front of us are voting for Abbas because they think that there's no other option provided to them. If they are provided any other option other than Abbas, they'll vote it. This is what we learned from these polls. And clearly Abbas has been unelected for 16 years, right? It's almost coming to 20 years. I think the last election was 2006, right? So we're almost actually at the 20-year mark. He's in his 90s. So the man is not actually mentally capable. This is why the West wants to keep him in power. This is why the West probably are giving him, shots of placenta or I don't know, to keep him alive, killing babies to give him some immune shots or something like this. Of course, it's all jokes, but it's half jokes. So that's one thing. And the other thing that I want to say is, I don't know if we have much time left. I don't know if you saw, and I'm going to veer off a little bit off this topic.
Before you do, should I remove this from the screen, or do you want me to keep it up?
Sure, remove it.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't know if you saw Thomas Barak interview on The National, which is a media outlet owned by the Emiratis, yesterday. Did you see it, Dimitri?
I saw that he had been interviewed. It's on my list of things to do, but you can tell us about it. Please do.
Yeah.
By the way, just remind our audience who Barak is.
Yeah. So Thomas Barak is the special envoy of Emperor Trump to the Middle East. He is also the ambassador to Turkey. And of course, he was the personal close friend of Epstein for almost 30 years. Okay. And was in charge of all the finances of the Trump campaign, okay, for elections, and was a stockbroker, kind of whatever you call them, that has managed much of the Trump family's wealth over the last, two and a half decades. So this is how the relationship of Thomas Barak with Trump and the internal close circle. Okay, so Barak has this interview, and I think he's getting very comfortable with the speech pattern of the Trump campaign and regime in the United States, how they speak to American media and Western media, that he's now speaking in the same tone to the Arabic public here. And this is really bad because the whole thing is supposed to be a propaganda campaign to try to convince the Lebanese people to hand over their weapons, that America is there for you to protect you and so on. But Barak in this interview was very open. He said there will never be peace in the Middle East. There will be no Palestinian state. There will be no peace in the Middle East as a whole because this is a war of domination. One party has to submit and another has to dominate. Okay? Another part of his interview, when talking about disarming Hezbollah, he said openly that the enemy of the United States is Hezbollah and Iran, that they will not be arming the Lebanese military in any shape or form to be able to defend itself against Israel, that their sole job and the armaments they will give them will be designed to be only directed against Hezbollah, and that that Israel will not withdraw from the occupied territories with or without the disarming of Hezbollah, the territories it occupies in Lebanon, and that this is what they require, is a full military campaign by the Lebanese military against its own people. He used those words. They're supposed to direct their arms against their own people. Okay? Mm-hmm. So, this put it in context of what's just happening in Gaza, put it in context that we're on this week was the 43rd anniversary of the Sabra and Shatila massacre, when after the Palestinians disarmed under American guarantees and left Beirut. Put it in context of where, this is the week of commemoration for the Pager terrorist attack and the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. So I think the U.S. is almost giving up even on the propaganda campaign here in Lebanon and is moving to this bullying stage.
So did this incompetent buffoon actually say what would happen? What is the incentive that the Lebanese have to comply with this demand? What will they get out of it if the Lebanese army turns its weapons against Hezbollah and succeeds in disarming Hezbollah? Did he say what the reward would be?
He didn't say, because clearly there will be no reward. He said it earlier that there's going to be only a dominant, and a submissive party. There's not going to be peace. You all Arabs have to basically acknowledge, and Muslims have to acknowledge, that there's a chosen people and you go bow down to them, and that your own prophets are liars. This is what acknowledging the existence of Israel means to an Arab and a Muslim, is to acknowledge that me and my ancestors and my prophets are all liars, right? Yeah. And this is why he understands clearly that there will be no peace. There will be someone who submits and someone who dominates. And in our case, in our minds here as Arabs and Muslims, we know the time will tell, and it will be us who are dominating our invaders.
So thank you for, I'm glad that you explained in detail what happened in that interview. I definitely will check it out. I suspect those of us who are watching, those of our audience members who are concerned with what's happening in Lebanon, sounds like a pretty important interview for us to absorb. I want to ask you one other question, though, about this international initiative to disarm the Palestinian people and to remove from power, a movement and a political party that so many Palestinians support. And that is that, the precursor to this recognition of Palestine by these Western states I mentioned was this conference that took place in New York in July, which was co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia. It was right. The Palestinians are toast when their destiny is being determined by a conference chaired by France and Saudi Arabia. But in any event, something emerged from that conference called the New York Declaration. Okay, and the New York Declaration explicitly demands disarmament by Palestinians, by resistance groups in Palestine, and that the collaborator of Mahmoud Abbas, or at least the authority he now rules, is given complete control, at least nominally, over all of the occupied territories. Okay, so they then take this thing, the New York Declaration, and they stick it in a UN General Assembly resolution, and it passes overwhelmingly a couple of weeks ago. And the vote count, I believe, was 142 states in favor, 10 against, and 12 abstentions. The 10 who voted against are the usual suspects. Okay, the real wackos who support Israel on the international stage, like Argentina, the United States, and Hungary. I'm talking about their governments, of course, not their people. And then, these Israel itself and these little tiny island states that have almost like less than 1% of the global population and are controlled by Washington: Micronesia, Nauru, Palau, Papua New Guinea, Paraguay. Oh, that's a South American state. Tonga. Anyways, I guess the part that I found, frankly, Laith, disappointing, and again, it's whatever you think about Hamas, if you care about democracy and the democratic will of the Palestinian people, you aren't going to demand as an ally of theirs that they disarm. And this is also, I think you mentioned this, Laith, it's their right in international law to resist with force their oppression and now their genocide. And you're not even going to demand that, a political party that so many of them support be excluded from the future governance of the occupied Palestinian territories. Now, you and I get that. I suspect a lot of people who are listening to this conversation will get that. But some of the states who voted for this resolution, I was quite surprised. Like Cuba voted for this resolution, and China voted for this resolution, and Bolivia voted for this resolution, and South Africa voted for this resolution. Now, to be fair, there's a lot more in there than, disarmament and removal of Hamas from the political scene. But why do you think, have any idea why they voted for this resolution? I mean, shouldn't they at least abstained because of the undemocratic demands that are being made of the Palestinian people in this thing?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't look at the details of this resolution and the votes, so I'm thankful that you brought them up and explained to us. Look, there's a absence right now on a global stage of a major power or major bloc that is speaking in absolute terms about international law, about human rights, about so forth. Even during the Cold War, the two blocs spoke in those terms, whether they were truthful about their wars or not. But now we have a ending unipolar world. But up until now, the multipolarity didn't emerge, and those who are supposed to be the poles in this multipolarity world have not taken their responsibility as they should. So I can understand with the destruction of Syria, with the destruction of Libya, and as states, that there is nobody on the podium of the United Nations pushing this clear, absolute agenda of sovereignty, decolonization, anti-imperialism. In fact, I was trying to watch earlier the General Assembly that's began at the United Nations, and I saw how Anna Marie, I don't know, Barbach, whatever her
And
name.
Elena, the former German foreign minister.
Yeah, she's
Who's
right
now-
now.
Go ahead.
She's now the chair of the UN General Assembly, and she keeps on turning off the mic on people, where the translators and you can't know what's happening, where the crowd inside the room in the General Assembly don't hear the speakers. Any president or prime minister that is speaking criticism of Israel, she's cutting them off. I mean, this is the absence of Castro or Gaddafi, who would have probably took his shoe off and threw it on her face. Gaddafi, you know, remember Gaddafi used to give hours of lectures at the United Nations, and they wouldn't dare cut his mic off. So now we have this really, you know, like weakened United Nations system. International law doesn't exist, and nobody is taking serious positions that can bring in, you know, smaller states to stand behind. Okay, or so I don't see anything coming out of this. In fact, again, these are all clear examples of desperation in the West to find a solution, to try to appease, but not destroy the Zionist colony, to, you know, which is not gonna pass. People are watching a genocide. The Palestinian people are not gonna accept, as we saw from those surveys that you put forward, such a stupid proposal. And the Western, you know, bloc and its vassals can keep on dreaming. And Saudi Arabia can dream that it can force a solution on the Palestinians, where the Israelis themselves and all the might of the Western Empire haven't been able to force the Palestinians to submit for 80 years. Saudis, they're even weaker than the Israelis, and the Palestinians have no fear of them. So it's just wishful thinking.
Right. My last question to you, Laith, has to do with the state of the resistance. And I just want to highlight a few recent developments. First of all, last week, I believe it was Thursday, 4 Israeli terrorists were killed and 3 were wounded when a Palestinian fighter in Gaza torched a tank. My understanding is he threw an incendiary device or explosive device into the tank, clearly risking his life in the process. And then this morning, the genocidal military announced that an Israeli terrorist who had the rank of major, had been killed in northern Gaza, which Israeli forces claim for a long time to have controlled by an RPG. And then we had this incident last week, I believe it was, when a Jordanian at the Allenby Bridge killed 2 Israeli soldiers before being killed himself. And Ansar Allah continues to fire drones, one of which struck Eilat just a few days ago. So you don't hear much about this in the Western corporate media, right? They want you to think that the resistance is either dead or on its last legs, and that the almighty Israeli military is marching towards its goal of total victory. What is your assessment of, please take your time, the overall state of the resistance and the stability of the genocidal entity?
You know, there was numbers that were leaked from the Israeli military over the last 2 days about the injuries. We don't have, the last clear number that we have from former chief of staff of the Israelis was 15,000 dead or bereaved families. That's what he said, which means 15,000 dead soldiers. This was a year ago. Well, right now, the numbers of injured have been leaked. 81,000 injured Israeli soldiers. Okay, 81,000. So I believe these numbers are even decreased from the reality. There's probably even more. They never tell us the full numbers. And given that the modern warfare average of injured soldiers to killed soldiers is 3-to-1, it means just from this injured numbers that we're past 25, 27, 28,000, maybe 30,000 Israeli soldiers dead. That's a huge number. That's 10 times the losses of Hezbollah. Okay, and this is also shows you that every time there's an operation in Gaza, when the Israelis say 1 Israeli soldier dead and 4 injured, or 10 injured, or whatever it is, that it's a lie, the numbers of the dead versus injured that we're hearing on a daily basis. And just calculating from the images, videos released by resistance groups over the last 24 months inside Gaza, just counting those tanks being targeted will probably get us a higher number than anything that the Israelis have ever admitted. And another number that came out from this is that the cost of treatment of Israeli soldiers injured over the last 24 months has reached $2.5 billion.
Wow.
Okay. So cost of treatment, $2.5 billion, that they are running out of doctors, that for every 750 injured soldiers, there's only 1 doctor to treat them. Okay. So it's a really bad situation for the Israeli military. They're only, where they have an upper hand is bombardment from air or bombardment from sea. Once they're down on the ground, they're screwed. And once they are faced with an enemy that has missiles and drones to hit their military targets, they are also screwed. When Iran, Yemen, and or Hezbollah targeted their military bases, they had huge losses that they have been hiding in terms of dead and injured Israeli soldiers. So out of those 81,000 injured Israeli soldiers, the number tells us that 20,000 of them were injured directly in Gaza. So that means that 3 out of the 4 injured Israeli soldiers have been injured by somebody else, by Hezbollah, by Iran, by Yemen. Okay, so these are all kind of the surface of truth of how bad the situation is for the Zionist military. It's non-functioning. What they're having to depend right now on the freaks of the hilltop colonists from West Bank move to the killing fields of Gaza, because all their seasoned soldiers and generals and officers have been dead or wounded and are retired. So they're now like having to depend on militias, as we saw with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, bringing bikers, fascist bikers, to man the aid points, the killing zones. Okay, this is how desperate the Israelis are. This is actually how desperate the Western powers are, because I just watched a video of talking about that there's 3 American pilots that are right now in military detention because they refused to fly surveillance or weapon deliveries to Israel. Okay. This is why the U.S. is having now to depend on bringing bikers, okay, gangsters, to man these killing zones in Gaza, because their own soldiers, special forces, which we have not heard about since that photo with Biden at the beginning of the genocide that got leaked, with the faces exposed of the American special forces, the Navy SEALs that are active on the ground in Gaza. I think much of them have already stopped and refuse to serve. And this is why there is now bikers on the ground in Gaza instead of American Navy SEALs.
Always a great pleasure speaking with you, my friend. And I look forward to our next conversation. In the interim, please stay safe, and please tell our audience where they can find the outstanding journalism of Free Palestine TV.
You can go to our website, freepalestine.video. You can find all our social media links from there. We're on Twitter and YouTube at TV Free Palestine. We're on Instagram, we're on Telegram, and people can donate because we're 100% viewer-funded programming. All the coverage of our costs comes from the donations. We hope that people can subscribe for a monthly donation. And, thank you very much, Dimitri, for having me. And I'll see you hopefully next week.
Thank you. And we're signing off from Beirut and Kalamata on September 22nd, 2025.